bubble seems to be coming to an end at last. The seeming corpse appears to be awakening, and a voice is coming to us, gentle, firm, and unmistakable in its utterances, and is gaining volume as days pass by. And behold, the sleeper is awakening. None can resist her anymore. Never is she going to sleep anymore. No outward powers can hold her back anymore, for the infinite giant is rising to her feet. Arise and awake and see her seated there on an eternal throne, rejuvenated, more glorious than she ever was, this motherland of ours. This, revered Swamiji on the dais, and very dear devotees and friends, is the topic for this evening's discussion, Swami Vivekananda and Awakening India, at the annual celebration of the birthdays of the Holy Trio by Ramakrishna Mission, Gurugram. I would now request revered Swami Shantatmanandaji Maharaj, Secretary of this ashram, to kindly deliver his welcome address.
ओम स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। जननीं शारदां देवीं रामकृष्णं जगद्गुरुं पादपद्मे तयोः श्रुत्वा प्रणमामि मुहुर्मुहुः। नमः श्री यतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरये सच्चित्सुखस्वरूपाय Swamini Tapaharani. Dear Swami Atma Shraddhananji, dear Swami Shuddhidananji, and the assembled devotees, it's always a pleasure to welcome all of you to this ashrama. We have, for this year's annual celebrations, two very distinguished monks. दोनों बहुत ही scholarly and they are well read in our literature and scriptures. I always try my best so that you all get the chance to listen to some of the best minds of the order. ऐसा नहीं है platform किसी को मौका देने के लिए, ऐसा नहीं. I always think that a devotee spend time and effort to come here. So it's our earnest effort to bring the best. In fact, both of them are very busy. Shuddhidanji is right now very, very busy with the inauguration of the huge building there in Advaita Ashrama, Kolkata. Just about in 20 days he has that function. And Shuddhidanji is in Kanpur, Ramanami is a big celebration. So tomorrow, right after the program at 12 o'clock at night, he is leaving back for Kanpur. So, इतनी मेहनत करके समय निकाल के आए दोनों. So we are very, very grateful to them for sparing time and coming here to participate in the celebrations and also address the devotees. So आज की आलोच्य विषय है, we are going to talk about Swami Vivekananda and Awakening India. About Swamiji, I think perhaps the best introduction in a very crisp manner with very few sentences was given by Sister Christine in her reminiscences. She writes, at long intervals of time, now and then, at long intervals of time, a being finds his way to this planet who is undoubtedly a wanderer from a different sphere, who brings with him to this sorrowful world some of the power, glory, and radiance of the far distant region. He walks among men, but he does not belong here. He is a traveler, he is a wanderer, he tarries but a night. And she says, blessed is the country in which he was born. Blessed, twice blessed are those who lived on this earth at the same time. And blessed, thrice blessed are the few who sat at his feet. So, we should understand what is the connect between Swamiji and Awakening India. Why should we talk about Swamiji? Two great minds of our nation. One was called the father of our nation, great Mahatma Gandhi. He came to Belur Math in 1921, and after visiting Belur Math, he wrote in the visitor's book, I have gone through his works thoroughly, and after reading them, my love for my country has grown thousandfold, is what Gandhiji wrote. And Rabindranath Tagore wrote, if you want to know India, study Vivekananda. So obviously there is great relevance and great connect. लेकिन स्वामी जी तो ये सब करने के लिए नहीं आए थे. वो जन्म से ध्यान सिद्ध महापुरुष. That was his nature. He was a born yogi, as none other than Sri Ramakrishna himself used today. And his one goal of life when he grew up was to find God. ऐसा कुछ है क्या? सब बोल रहे हैं. So he went all over and finally came to Sri Ramakrishna. But such was the transformation. So much so, one of the Western disciple writes that our love for India gave birth in our hearts when he heard him pronounce for the first time that 5-letter word India. You cannot imagine how the way he would pronounce that 5-letter word, so much he could convey India's great heritage, her past, her present degradation, her future glory, and everything. So that was the transformation. How did it happen? Because obviously you all know that incident after his experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Thakur said, now this would remain locked. It will be open to you after you have to do mother's work. Probably even then, it was not that clear to Swamiji as to what was his role and what was he really going to do. But then, in his wandering days, he went to Avari Baba, tried to learn yoga, etc. from him. That was not possible because in a very mystical way, Sri Ramakrishna intervened. And then finally, he reached Kanyakumari after sitting 3 days and nights in meditation. He really discovered what was his role, because during his entire wanderings, he was appalled by the poverty, the superstition, and the illiteracy of this nation, which was once at the forefront in the world and used to contribute significantly to the GDP of the entire world. So his heart was really stirred, was burning with that kind of a feeling. Then, of course, in Kanyakumari, the blueprint was unveiled before his mind. What exactly was to do, how was he to go forward in his mission. So then obviously, that's why he went to America, not exactly to preach Hinduism or to participate in the parliament. They were all secondary. Initially it was to go there, collect funds for the Indian work and do something for the masses. But then, of course, in so many ways, he was influenced in so many ways, he participated in so many ways, he contributed. I mean, it's all a hugely different story. Then now when he came back, the rest of the time, he came back in 1897 at the beginning, until he laid down his life in Mahasamadhi in 1902, the last 5.5 years, day and night, the one thought that was reverberating constantly in his heart was India, India, India. How this country's glory can be restored. Of course, he said, I'm not just stating, I'm saying her future glory would far surpass her past glory. This was his prediction. Already we are seeing some signs. So, his mission was to awaken India. In what sense? to awaken her so that the nation is re-established in her glory. It will be a regeneration of the motherland itself, rebuilding India, so to say. So he talked about this awakening in ever so many dimensions. Probably, 6 important dimensions if you look at. One was he talked about awakening the youth, all directed towards that ultimate goal of awakening the nation itself and re-establishing her in her glory. Of course, in and through all that, his one message was constantly spiritual. All these were all the outer manifestations, but the underlying current was always spiritual regeneration, spiritual awakening. But then he said, I do not believe in a God who cannot bring a morsel of food to the mouth of an orphan and promises a heaven for me. So he was very, very clear. Somewhere we have lost the plot, lost track. Our belief in Vedanta and such high ideals and ideologies have really not worked that way. It should be perceived even in a practical life. How can a country which believes in such high principles languish in such poverty and illiteracy and so on? So it was very, very clear that they should not in any way come in the way of the country's progress, growth, etc. That's why, although he was an extraordinary spiritual giant, ये दोनों कैसे उन्होंने एक साथ देख पा रहे थे? ये देश का समृद्धि साथ के साथ जो आध्यात्मिक वही दिशा में भी जाकर वहाँ में जरूर था, because he was saying our religion has been reduced to the cooking parts. Don't touch isms. Don't do this. Don't do this, that. He said no, that was not the core of religion. So we have lost on both counts. So his idea was how we can regenerate so that the country can again shine its glory. About the dimensions, first he talked about awakening the youth, because he knew that they are really the backbone. They are the people who really work out his ideas like lions, as he said. What was the awakening of youth? He gave wonderful ideas to them. One of the verses, take up one idea, think of it, breathe of it, live that idea, keep every other idea aside. This is the way to success, and so on. He said how, as youth, you should assume responsibility, carry the mantle on your shoulders for regenerating the motherland. So he talked about awakening the youth. Of course, he had a specific message, awakening for the so-called reformers. He said the country's future is not determined by the marriages of the widows. He said we have to think of far more important things. How all reforms start with liberty, and unless you really give people that kind of a liberty, unless you lead not as a leader but as an attitude of service, no reform is possible. He said when people learn to stand on their own, when the people learn to help themselves, then only real regeneration is possible. He said even if you pour the entire wealth of Kubera in a single village, still that will not be sufficient unless people learn to stand on their own, help themselves, and so on. Then of course he talked very elaborately about education, again another area where he wanted a real awakening, in the sense that he said education, he had a very special new idea, something very new. Education not something which is thirst from outside, but something the manifests the inherent power, glory, knowledge, and whatnot. So he also defined education very uniquely and said Atma Shraddha was the cornerstone of education. Unless this is inculcated in the students, education is absolutely meaningless that way. So he wanted that kind of in that field of education also. Then he talked elaborately about empowering women, how they can be awakened really. He said they should be allowed to manage their own, we should not interfere. And they said that the sense of equality. He pointed out great women who can show the way and so on. They should also be given access to the highest knowledge. So again, he talked elaborately about awakening women. And then he was so much moved by the condition of the masses. The awakening of the masses is another great theme, idea which really worked constantly in his mind. He gave wonderful prescriptions for that also. He said, unless they are given access to education and other facilities and so on, and he also said how this idea of caste can be tackled not by any kind of artificial equality, not by bringing down those who are high up, raising everyone to the level of Brahminhood. That was his idea of tackling the caste problem and how it can be, how it can ultimately lead to social equality and so on. So, awakening of masses, he has written very stirringly about the condition of the masses. Says, I call each one a traitor who, having been educated at the expense of the masses, pays not the least heed to them. So he was very clear that unless, see, today we talk so much about inclusive growth and all that. Long ago he said, unless we take the masses forward, no, nothing is possible, and it's not, the country will not grow at all. So he never believed in just a growth of few and the rest being allowed to go as they are. He said, no, everybody should be taken along. So his idea of the awakening of the masses is another important theme in his scheme of awakening. And then finally he said that he was very clear that India's strength is religion, India's strength is spirituality. He says each nation has a very special, unique feature. In the case of India, he said it is spirituality. We must really strengthen the nation in that line, and then only the other dimensions of society can be taken care of. And he was also very clear that how India's growth, India's development in that direction will lead to the regeneration of the world itself. The type of Vishwa Guru he talked about, how India would say would show the way to the entire world. And then of course ये भी उन्होंने कहा that renunciation service, ये दोनों सेवा त्याग और सेवा, ये दोनों ही एक देश का मूल आधार है. इस आदर्श पर एक देश का जो कुछ करें, then only that will lead to an all-round and wonderful development of our nation. So this Bharat, India was one constant theme he talked about day and night. Because in the West he was really concerned. He only talked largely about Advaita. He saw that socially they were quite developed, quite advanced. They were not in need of that kind of an awakening, but he really worked for the spiritual awakening, gave them the highest message of Advaita. He hardly even talked about Sri Ramakrishna except a couple of lectures. So that was, but coming back to India, there's a complete shift in focus, totally dedicated to the regeneration of our motherland. That's why in that attempt he really established the Ramakrishna mission, much against even the opposition of some of his own brother disciples who could really understand what is their dear Naren was trying to do, because again against Ramakrishna clearly said, जीवन का उद्देश्य है भगवान लाभ करना, ये क्या कर रहे हैं, ये काम दाम कहाँ से ले आए? No, but he was very clear. He said, I am not doing anything on my own. Whatever I do is exactly as what Sri Ramakrishna has ordered me or kind of inspired me to do. So he was very clear that through this Ramakrishna mission, of course, the Atmanamokshartam Jagadhitaya, the ideas he placed before the order, was very clear that while there will be a tremendous striving for the individual spiritual uplift, that should be combined with an extraordinary degree of service to the society. Jagat Hita cannot be neglected or cannot take a back seat. So that is why he set up a very unique kind of a monastic order, something which was unheard of, where there were huge protests and they were very, very critical initially. But slowly today, if you see, every religious organization in India, they are into service activities. Swamiji was the forerunner. He really showed the way how these two can be beautifully combined in one's life. So we have a very wonderful theme for today, and we have two great speakers. I'm sure they will throw a lot of light on what Swamiji did by way of awakening the nation. Once again, we welcome all of you to today and tomorrow's full session. Thank you very much.